want to introduce to you guys Dr. Caroline Addington, because she was on episode 26 of the Brand Interrupted podcast, and she is an absolute content wizard genius, mixing soul and science and business, and I just adored our episode. So we wanted to come on and do a live and just give you a little sneak peek of what the episode is about and some common Q&As that we got. So welcome, Caroline.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's an honor. I'm so excited. This episode was so good. I went back and re-listened to it and I was like, oh my gosh, so many wisdom nuggets. So I'm excited for all the questions.
Amazing. Okay, well, let's just dive in. So the first question that I got was around, and this is actually part of my own formulated question, but it's a sneak peek to the podcast episode where you talked about what the wounded sense of self is, self-trust, wounded sense of self-trust. And because I see this come up a lot with my audience, Caroline, how do you balance between expert advice and trusting just like what feels right for you?
Oh, that's a good question. You guys are asking good questions. I'm excited. Yeah. So what's beautiful is that the more you continue to develop your expertise, which is a lifelong process, right? And we talk about this in the podcast, is that process of forever learning and being in a place of acceptance that you're always learning, right? But the beauty is that the more that you develop your expertise, then that, tinkers with what is your gut reaction and your gut instinct and your intuition. It becomes a part of your experience and your embodied wisdom. And so I think that, that's a long-winded way to say that the balance is pretty natural over time. And your gift that you get to give both yourself as a human and everybody who's in your sphere is that just insatiable curiosity to keep learning. And if you have that drive to keep learning and keep developing your expertise, then it kind of rolls in and wraps into just who you are as a human. And it becomes a part of your intuition. Does that make sense,
I love it. And I know in the episode, you guys got to go listen, that you talk more in depth of actual tangible ways that you can tap into this and kind of evaluate what feels good, what doesn't. And something that came up for me is I find that we often hire people that it's almost like they already have the answer. We just almost need to hear it from them. But what resonates with us is almost what confirms our self-trust. And so whenever I'm working with clients, I'm mindful not to say this is how you have to do it.
Yeah.
And I'll ask them what actually feels good to them.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, because when you do that, you're setting your people up for success long after you're working together. And I think that that's such a big difference. That's one of the beauties of coaching, is that it's not about when done, I'm not going to say when done right, but when done a certain way, right? It's not about telling people go do X, Y, Z. It's about saying here's how you can self-source that wisdom and self-source that information so that when we're no longer working together, you're not flopping around and feeling lost. Yeah. You have the tools to self-source all your wisdom.
Yeah. Self-source. I love that.
Yeah.
All right. So this question, I won't name names, but you guys know who you are. They say, I'm not entirely sure on what I want to offer yet, or even really what my message is. Should I even be putting content out?
Okay. Yes. We talk about this a little bit in the podcast. So if this is a burning question, I'm going to say definitely go listen to it, because we jam hard on this, but yes, because there's so much more to putting yourself out there than just having a clear message and knowing what you're going to offer. There's all the inner support structures that you have to build, like not being afraid of what Aunt Susan is going to say. If she's going to throw poop on you, you got to build up the internal support to be cool with that. Not being afraid of having people, not like what you're saying or not agree with what you're saying. Not being afraid to speak your truth and be vulnerable. These are all really important ingredients in a strong personal brand. And they have everything and nothing to do with what you're offering and what your message is. They're independent of that in some ways because they're internal. So the sooner that you start putting yourself out there, the sooner that you start megaphoning, yo, I'm here, whatever that looks like, the faster you get to build up that internal structure, so that when you, and you will, when you get more clarity on your offer and your message, there won't be anything within you that's holding you back. There won't be like some inner self-sabotage situation, and you will just like go out into the world full force and change all the lives like a gas.
And I love that you bring this up, because again, you talked about in the podcast about growing up in public, and I think that's kind of what you're getting at here is like, I always say, like, if you don't know what to say, like, just start with what's on your heart. Like, just start speaking your mind. I mean, we have these amazing platforms to just talk about the things. Like, it doesn't even have to be a business. Like, I think sometimes we put a lot of pressure, like, well, how can I monetize this? It's like, well, you don't always have to monetize your message. Like, you can just start with speaking what's on your heart, seeing who shows up, and then creating a program around it. Like,
personal anecdote, that's exactly how I ended up in content creation as like my niche and my focus, was because I was talking about the things that I cared about, which were communication and storytelling and all this stuff. And then people started listening, and the people who were listening, I was like, yeah, what are you struggling with? Why are you listening? What is this helping you with? And they were like, content. And I was like, cool, we're going to talk more about content now. And that's like how it was born. Your niche and your message, I think that it's a very collaborative thing. It's you and your audience coming together on like, these are my gifts. How is it solving problems for you?
Absolutely. I so agree with that. And I'm always telling that to my clients as well. It's kind of like a tango between the two. Like, yeah, you want to be authentic to yourself, but you also either have to like find or create your audience. And I mean, like, as a quick side note, I'll just use Lady Gaga as an example. Like, she's, you know, someone who can be considered so extreme and out there, but the Little Monsters, there was an audience for that. She created that. So you can absolutely cultivate your audience.
Billie Eilish, right?
Yeah.
This is a great example. Like, I feel like, you know, 10 years ago, people have been like, what, this is a thing? But like, yeah, super thing. And like, she's creating a movement.
It's so true. I love it. All right, next question, because we're going to try and keep this like short and sweet for you guys. Because again, episode 26 of the podcast. This person asks, is it truly possible to fully write out 30 days of content in an hour? I see ads for this type of thing, and it annoys me because it sounds unrealistic.
Oh, goodness. Okay. I'm actually gonna, I hope this is okay, Brittany. I'm actually gonna, we can drop a link to a specific podcast episode that I did this past week about this exactly. Okay. Here's the thing. Okay. I'm so excited about this question. The way that people historically content batch is totally jank. It goes against the way that the brain works, right? So like bringing in a little bit of science here. It's totally counter to our neuroscience, right? So typically what people do is they'll be like, okay, I'm gonna, you know, Monday educational post, Wednesday lifestyle post, Friday promotional post, and then they sit down to write, and they're like, well, what do I want to teach about? Oh, I'll create this piece of content, and then I'll edit it, and I'll pair it with a picture. Done. Yeah. Wednesday lifestyle post. Well, what do I want to talk about? I'm going to write it, right? So it's like, yeah, you're going through the whole process one by one, and then putting it on a shelf and saying done. Each piece of content is realistically 3 different phases and 3 different tasks. There's the analytical in-depth planning, there's the free form inspired flow writing, and then there's the putting on your editor's hat and editing. When you try and cram all 3 of those tasks into one content batch session, your efficiency goes down the toilet, and there's no freaking way that you could batch 30 days of content in 1 hour. Totally non-real, right? Versus if you break it up, you take, you know, legit time to really plan. You're not just planning, I'm going to do an educational post. It's like, what's the headline going to be? What am I going to talk about? What pain points am I going to be hitting for my people? What's the solution I'm going to be providing? You're really creating like a skeleton. And I would say I spend more time planning my content than creating it.
Yeah.
So then when you sit down to create, it's that inspired free flow. You have the structure and you're just brain dumping into it. And when you do that, yes, you can dump out a piece of content in 10 minutes, right? But it's because you set yourself up so well. So that's my long answer for content batching, is that the old school way of content batching is garbage. It's total garbage. So plan like, can I curse?
Yeah.
Okay, plan like a motherfucker, and then just brain dump and like protect that brain dump time. Don't let anybody interrupt you, or don't let your notifications interrupt you, and then polish at a different time.
Yeah, I can't agree more, because I've had different phases where sometimes I'll content batch. Like if I'm recording videos, then I'll like batch record, then I'll batch edit,
Right.
then I'll batch post. So it's always kind of broken down. But if I sit there and do from A to Z, it just takes longer. I don't know why. Probably what you just explained, but
yeah, you're switching from left brain, right brain, and you're task switching. And every time you task switch, you lose at least 20 minutes trying to get back in the zone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was the other thing I was going to say on that? It kind of leads to the next question. Let me just read through this. Yeah. So the follow-up question of this was, how do you create efficiently, or sorry, how to efficiently organize content like in a content bank?
Okay. Yay, you guys are, y'all are like making my little content heart so happy. So this is great. So I use a Google Sheet, and I put all my planning, you know, like I mentioned some of the high points, right? What are the pain points? What is the type of content? What's the solution? What kind of, what's the format? Is it a post? Is it a podcast? What am I doing here? And what day, right? So I outline all of that for however long, whether it's 3 weeks at a time, I outline all that in a Google Sheet, Google spreadsheet. And then when I go to create, I just copy and paste each line for each piece of content to the start of a new page in a Google Doc. And then I brain dump, right?
Wow.
So in terms of planning and creating, that's my method. I will say one thing that I strongly recommend to any of my clients is to have that planning spreadsheet in like right next to all of your market research. When you're planning, I want you to have your market research open so that you are using the verbatim words of your ideal client. You're not making anything up. You can literally copy and paste. This is the pain point that I'm talking about. Another really important, I think, content organization tip is around repurposing. So it's so huge. It changes the game. Once you've been creating for a hot minute, you don't have to reinvent the wheel so much. And it makes launching much easier because all of a sudden you have all this content if you're launching the same program over and over. So just having, you know, folders in your phone, maybe a folder for mini trainings, maybe a folder for like uplifting mindset, sis, I love you type content, and a folder for, you know, sales and promotion, and just saving your content so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel on a day where you feel like dick. And you're like, you're on your period, you're having all the dark chocolate, and you're like, I don't want to create anything. You've got your own back.
Yeah. And I love that you said this. And to kind of swing back to the other question around like the ads we see where like they make things sound like, oh, well, create it all in 1 hour. It's like, I think every person sells their own system and process, and they're sharing what works for them. And so to bring this like full circle around full self-trust is that it's about identifying what actually works for you, and not like shaming or guilting yourself if you can't fit in their process of how they create content. And I know for me personally, like I'm similar to you, like I have a Google Drive folder and then docs, and it's like copy for launch, copy for freebie, copy for, like it's all organized in there. So oftentimes I'm not reinventing the wheel. Or I even have a doc where it's like new content and I'll dump it in there and then I'll organize it later. I systematically organize my content documents. Because sometimes like you'll be, I don't know, out and you think of an idea, you write it on a napkin. Does anyone else do this? Like I get downloads.
I like record in my phone.
Oh, that's smart. Yeah. So that's another thing is like, I'll get ideas, but I won't necessarily like write them right away. I'll put the idea in the document to then on a different day, like when I actually sit down and write the content, so that I'm not, because when you're running an online business, especially, like you have to know how to manage your time. And I don't know, Caroline, what your experience is, but like writing content when you're stressed is really like a pain in the ass. Like it's really hard to be creative and find your words when you're like, oh God damn it, I just have to write this post or do this thing. And you're like,
yeah. I mean, I would say managing time, yes. And then like layered on top of that, managing your energy, right?
Yeah.
So like when you're in that space of I'm so stressed and I got to do the things, it's like, okay, just that awareness. What led to this? What was I doing? What did I eat for breakfast? What did I not eat for breakfast? Like, how much coffee did I drink? Like, did I overdo it? Have I had enough water? You know, and like just bringing, kind of like we were talking about on the podcast where you're collecting data, right?
Yeah.
You're saying like, right? You're like, what led to this energetic place? And moving forward, like, how can I manage my energy better so that I more, not always, but I more than often than not feel at ease and relaxed and, you know, excited about what I'm doing as opposed to stressed. Yeah.
I love this. And so to wrap up on this topic, you know, I love this thing of data, and we talk extensively. This is an hour-long podcast episode, you guys. So if you want to know like the actual details, you talk extensively around figuring out what works for you. And a lot of it is collecting data. And so sometimes when we're asking questions, we're living in the hypothetical. You have to do it, experience it, and then evaluate. That's like, that's my final sign off. But
Totally.
any final words you want to add in, Caroline? Like, where can we find you?
Yeah, for sure. I play the most on Instagram. That is where I hang out the most for sure. I like it just because of the intimacy factor. I like it. But my handle is at caroline.addington_. So you can find me there. And I mentioned earlier too, that I also have a podcast, the Empowered Expression Podcast. And if you guys have questions about content organization and stuff, there's plenty of stuff in there for that.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Caroline, for taking the time to chat.
Totally.
Facebook viewers and our Instagram viewers, kind of.
Yes, we'll come back Instagram. It'll be on IGTV. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It was so much fun. It was such a good conversation, and I re-listened to it yesterday, and I was like, oh man, I forgot how great this conversation was. So it's a beautiful gift. Thank you.
Thanks.